not to my fellow men, but to him. So I have gone to the law and to the testimony, testing everything by that infallible standard. I have not sat down in idleness, taking things for granted because they were preached with brilliant oratory, but like the Bereans, I have searched the Scriptures daily to see whether these things are so or not. Ah, beloved, it will make a soft pillow for your head if in the retrospect of life you can say, I have made the law of God in its teachings and in its commands to be the rule of my whole life. God grant that you may have that satisfaction at the last. Further, dear friends, this summary is excellent for its length as well as for its breadth. For here the man of God says, I have kept thy precepts and thy testimonies. I do not know how long the psalmist had kept them, but it seems to me natural that he should make this summary towards the close of his life. I pray that it may be so with us when we come to die. I have known the grey-headed old man, how well I knew him, and how greatly I loved him, for I mean my venerable grandfather, who when he was dying could say, that which I preached when I first entered the pulpit, I have preached to the last. For 58 years, to the best of my knowledge, I have preached nothing but Jesus Christ and him crucified. I have nothing to retract from the testimony which I have given, for what the Spirit of God taught me, that I have taught to others. And he could equally have said, at the last, I have as a father trained my children in God's fear, and they are all following in my footsteps. I have as a pastor watched over my flock with sedulous care. I have set them an example which they can safely follow, and there is no man who can truthfully lay a charge against me, for in all uprightness and integrity have I walked before God. Mark you, this dear old man was a Calvinist, an out-of-date preacher of free grace, who would not for a moment take the slightest credit to himself for anything that he was or had done. Yet he could not have said less than this, unless he had pretended to possess a modesty which was not true, and mimicked a humility which was based on falsehood. In like manner may we be kept, by the grace of God, clear of all trusting in our works, but at the same time may we abound in good works to the glory of God, and both in thought and in life may we be clear in the sight of God. Oh, how I have envied that first Quaker, George Fox, who, with all the eccentricities of his life, could honestly say on his deathbed, I am clear, I am clear, I am clear of the blood of all men. This is the highest ambition that a minister's heart may indulge, that he should be able to say that at the last, as other men of God have been able to do. So you see, this is a blessed summary as to length as well as breadth. Above all things, it is excellent from its cause. Notice how the psalmist says to the Lord, I have kept thy precepts and thy testimonies. That is what the true man of God still says. I followed the precept because it was God's precept. I did not care whether a church or a council of any sort had set its stamp upon it. It was God's precept, and that was enough for me. And I believed the doctrine because it was his testimony. It might not be the testimony of any reformer or confessor, but it was enough for me that it was God's testimony. That should be the reason for our conviction and our action also. The psalmist kept God's precepts and testimonies because all his ways were before God. He felt that God was watching him. He lived under the consciousness of God's presence with him, both by night and by day, and therefore he dared not believe anything contrary to God's truth, or act contrary to God's command. Thou, God, seest me, either held him in check or else impelled him onward. This is the way for us also to live. Dear friends, I pray that you may live thus. I think the psalmist also meant, when he said that all his ways were before God, that they were under God's smile of approval. He not only observed, but he communed with and commended his servant. Another psalmist, or perhaps the writer of these words, which form our text, said, "I will walk before the Lord in the land of the living." And Enoch might have said, "I have walked with God from day to day." Communion with him has been my continual delight, and all my ways have been before him. The book of Psalms begins thus: "Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night." His ways are ever before God, and he has respect unto the law of the Lord evermore. Such a life as that, dear friends, is excellent from its use. It is sure to be a life of happiness, even though it should bring on persecution. It is certain also to be a useful life. It is an example which your children and your children's children may safely follow. It is an argument for the gospel which the most sceptical cannot refute, and it is a most blessed way of propagating that gospel. For men are more often convinced by our actions than by our words. Seek after it, dear friends, and let your lives be such that you may close them with the words of my first text: "I have kept thy precepts and thy testimonies, for all my ways are before thee." Now let us pause for a moment and observe that the psalmist, after he had spoken thus, and spoken quite sincerely and truly, yet felt that he must close his long life summary in another fashion. He then uttered our second text, which I call a searching scrutiny. "I have gone astray like a lost sheep. Seek thy servant, for I do not forget thy commandments." His life was perfect after the manner of scriptural perfection. But when it was carefully examined and scrutinized, it was found to be manifestly imperfect. Suppose you take a needle, one of the very best that has ever been made. Any seamstress would be glad to use it. She would never think of sending a packet of such needles back and saying that they were not good. They are bright, untarnished, sharp, smooth, all that they should be, quite perfect needles. But just put one of them under a microscope. I have done so, and then see what it is like. Why now, it is a bar of steel, rough and ugly looking, tending towards a point at one end, but certainly very blunt. That is just the difference between the microscopic examination and the ordinary observation of our poor eyes. So the life of a believer may be like that of Job, perfect and upright. But when it comes under the scrutiny of an eye that is illuminated by the Spirit of God and touched with the heavenly eye salve, quite another verdict is given, and tremblingly, with many tears, the confession is poured into the ear of God: "I have gone astray, like a lost sheep," followed by the petition, "Seek thy servant," and the renewed declaration, "For I do not forget thy commandments." Here is first a confession of imperfection and of helplessness. It means really a continual imperfection and helplessness, for the Hebrew verb relates not only to the past, but to the present. It might just as well be read, "I am still going astray, like a lost sheep." Indeed, it must be so read, for the psalmist goes on to say, "Seek thy servant." He would not have offered such a prayer as this if the confession had only related to something that was at an end. There is here not only imperfection and the tendency to a continuous imperfection, but there is also an acknowledgement of helplessness. The psalmist does not say, "I have gone astray like a lost sheep, but I can return when I please." No, he prays to the Lord, "Seek thy servant," as if the only help for him lay in the search which the great shepherd would make, and the consequent restoration which would come by his gracious and powerful hand. Let us just think for a little while, and then I feel sure that we shall soon say that we must confess to God as the psalmist did. I mean that each one of those here present who have led godly lives will still have to say to the Lord, I have gone astray like a lost sheep. Think first of God's precepts. Have we never
Please subscribe to the Spurgeon Sermon channel to receive the earliest videos.
gone astray in heart from any one of them? Suppose you never have departed from them in life, which is a very charitable supposition. Have you never in heart felt the precepts to be hard? Had you been really perfect, it would have been easy, it would have been natural to you to keep them. Have you not sometimes had to whip yourself up to a duty? The need of being whipped up to it proves that evil is still remaining within you. Then have you never forgotten a precept? Lives there a man who has carried out all the precepts of God without forgetting any one of them? I would like to see the brother who has done so, but such a brother I never expect to see. I think that with the most of us it is thus. There is a certain duty and we try to do it with all our hearts. But meanwhile we forget another duty which is just as binding upon us as the first was. We look right on, and so we overlook the duties that lie on the right hand and on the left. The very intensity which makes us earnest about one thing often prevents our attending to another thing, which is equally important, and thus we present to God one duty stained with the blood of another. I have known a father, in aiming at being firm with his children, err by being too severe, and far oftener have I known others, intent upon being kind to their children, who have grown like Eli, and have winked at their sin. That is but one instance among thousands of the evil I am deploring. A man may say, I shall rebuke so-and-so for his fault. But he does it too sharply, and therein he errs. Or afraid of being too severe, he says nothing, and therein he errs. Did you ever in all your life do any one thing so well that it could not possibly have been done better? The difference between the good there was in what you did and the good there might have been in it is just so much of deficiency, and sin is any want of conformity to perfection. Whether you fall short of the mark or go over the line matters little. In either case you have missed the perfection that God demands. If you do not reach his standard, you have not yet attained to perfect holiness, and there is still something of sin to confess. The precepts of the Lord are so broad that they touch the secret imagination of the heart. Is there a man living who never has an unclean desire? I fought against it, says one. I know you did, but the very desire was sinful. Or if it has not come to a desire, was there never an impure imagination that crossed your mind? Yes, it just flitted across my mind, you say. Well, in proportion as you yielded to it, in that proportion it was a guilty thing. I must say it, if even a dream has had anything of sin in it, and you have been complacent over it, it detects the sin that is within you. For were you really perfect, even the very passing thought, though it were but as a bird of the air that flew above your head, would still, by casting a shadow over your spirit, cause you vexation and sorrow. Keep that microscope close at hand, and it need not have very strong lenses either. Only look fairly into your own life, first by the light of the law of God, and secondly by the light of your obligations to Christ, who has redeemed you with his precious blood. And then I feel sure you will have to say, I fall short even of my own ideal, and I am persuaded that my ideal falls very far short of what God's ideal of perfection is. Has it not often struck you, dear friends, as a very wonderful thing, that good men, some of the best of men who have ever lived, have nevertheless been guilty of things which at the present moment we regard as heinous crimes? Mr. Whitfield had a strong objection to slavery, but still it did not seem to him to be wrong to have a number of Negroes at the orphan house in Savannah, and to speak of them as his goods and chattels. That was a matter about which the conscience of the good man was not then enlightened. We do ill if we condemn men too strongly for things about which no enlightenment has come to them. But are they not themselves guilty in the sight of God? Of course they are. There are men nowadays carrying on trades that are doing mischief, and only mischief, to the populace. But they are not aware of the evil. Their conscience is not enlightened about it. To take another line of thought, suppose a man is worth many hundreds of thousands of pounds, and all the while there are millions of people abroad perishing for lack of the gospel. And often the great deficiency of the missionary societies is not in the men, but in the means used to send out the preachers of the gospel. Is that man right before the living God, who says, "I am not my own, for I am bought with a price, and all that I am and have belongs to Christ," and yet who nevertheless remains immensely rich, rich beyond anything that he or his children after him can ever want? Yet possibly his conscience is not enlightened about that matter, and it is no very great crime in his judgment. Neither may you and I condemn him, for our own conscience is probably quite as much in the dark upon something else. But whenever anybody who is very rich gets up and says, "I am a perfect man," I feel inclined to say what Christ said to the young man who thought that he was perfect: "Sell all that thou hast." Somebody asks, perhaps, does Christ propose that test to every one of us? No, certainly not. But to any of us who say that we are perfect, that test may be applied. If you are such a perfect man, see if you can do as our Lord said: sell all that you have and give the proceeds to the poor. I have known a man sing, "Yet if I might make some reserve, and duty did not call, I love my God with zeal so great, that I should give him all." But all the while he has been trying to feel whether it was a threepenny piece or a fourpenny piece that he was going to give to the collection. As I begin to think of these various things which I have mentioned, just casting, as it were, a little ray of light upon them, not the great light of the eternal purity of God, I cannot understand how there can be any man, even though he has kept God's precepts and testimonies as far as he could, who nevertheless is not bound to say, "I have gone astray, like a lost sheep." But further, suppose it to be possible that we have not gone astray from the precepts of the Lord. How about his testimonies? Is any man here prepared to say, "I feel that I have in every respect believed the truth as it is revealed in God's word, and that I have never erred from it"? Do you believe all the truth, and all the truth in its right proportions and relations? And do you give due emphasis to each truth at the right moment? Have you never believed that which afterwards you found to be incorrect and false? Possibly you have not willfully done this, but have you done it at all? Think of Augustine, that mighty master and teacher in the Church of God, sitting down in his old age and writing his confessions. Alas, even he found that he had plenty of things to confess and to amend. And it must be so with us too. The very man who can say, "In the main I have preached the same things all through my ministry," yet nevertheless adds, "I preached them as far as I knew them, but I did not know them at first as I learned them afterwards. I did not know this truth in relation to that truth, and I sometimes misrepresented God in my very zeal to give a correct statement, and I slew one truth in my defence of another." Our friends, we are all so fallible. Nay, more than that, we do all so sadly fail in one way or another, that we must meekly bow our head, and each one say, "I have gone astray like a lost sheep." I am afraid that I might have put this matter much more strongly than I have ventured to lay it before you, and still have been within the mark, but there I leave it, as I want to speak upon one more point. In that prayer of the psalmist, "Seek thy servant," I discern conscious faith in the divine power. He seems to say, Lord, I am as silly as a sheep, but if I were only a sheep, I could not pray. I am a servant too, thy servant. It is my joy, it is my glory to be thy servant. Now, Lord, because I am thy servant, seek me. Do not lose me, Lord. Thou hast bought me with thy blood.
Please subscribe to the Spurgeon Sermon channel to receive the earliest videos.
I am seeking thee, Lord, so come thou and seek me. I want to be perfectly holy. Come and help me now. Forgive every sin of omission or of commission. Draw me away from every mistake. Draw me nearer and yet nearer to thyself. Seek thy servant. Perhaps you are ill or even dying. Well, living or dying, this prayer may still suit you. Seek me, Lord, seek thy servant. Then lastly comes that sweet reflection, for I do not forget thy commandments. I have a love to them, I have a longing for them, and I am sure that this never grew in my heart by nature. It is the gift of thy grace, and because thou hast put it there, Lord, and thou hast begun to work in me, finish thy work, I pray thee, Lord. Thou hast made me long to be quit of every false way, therefore deliver me from it. Thou hast made me wish to be transparent and sincere. Thou hast made me hungry and thirsty to be like thyself. Then wilt thou not satisfy the craving thou hast thyself imparted. The dearest idol I have known, whate'er that idol be, help me to tear it from thy throne and worship only thee. If I hold an error, yet thou knowest that I wish not to hold it. Show me that it is an error, and I have done with it at once. And if I am acting in good faith, in a wrong way, Lord, do thou but let me see that it is wrong, and cost what it may, I will do the right, and cease from the evil. This is a blessed way in which to close our life. But there is a more blessed thing still, and that is, after all is said and done, and after God's grace has been praised for everything that is lovely and of good repute, that it is wrought in us, then to cast bad works and good works all away, and just look to the cross, and to the cross alone, and see our life in Jesus' death, our healing in his wounds, our glory in his shame, our heaven in his anguish. Look, saint, look now. Sinner, you may do the same. Where the saint's salvation is, there is yours too. And if the grey-beard, hoary with years of honour and of virtue, gathering up his feet in the bed, knows no better or brighter hope than that of being justified through the righteousness of Christ and washed in his blood, it is a joy to know that the same hope is free to you, guilty ones, who have not kept the precepts or the testimonies of God. Turn you to Christ on Calvary. Cast your eyes on him who, like the brazen serpent, is lifted up, that every sin-bitten one may look unto him and live. O, by his grace, look unto him now, and you shall live. For never soul looked to him and died while looking there. God bless you, dear friends, for Christ's sake. Amen.